Hi, I am Christy, and you are watching the Lion's Call review of Logos Theater's The Horse and His Boy. And with me today are Swan White.
Hello.
And Kestrel. And Lil.
Hello.
And we're all going to be discussing the show. We saw it 1 week ago today in Greenville, South Carolina. And here's got our program here. Very nice design work, whoever did that. I like it. They've got a little horse worked into the R right there. That's kind of cool.
I like that.
Yeah. And then we came back with some swag. I noticed that Swan is wearing her Horse and His Boy shirt, which matches my button.
I got one of those too.
Yeah, these were cool. These were really nice. And then we had Swan also made us all some TLC buttons so that it was great. We actually wore them. And so when we went, one of the gentlemen who provided a lot of the props for the show recognized us and was like, "Oh, you're from TLC." So that was pretty fun and led to some good conversations.
Cool.
And
bookmarks from you.
What's that? Yeah, I made some bookmarks, and that was a lot of fun. So they had Aslan's head and then Core superimposed in front of him as a little cutout, and then it said, "I was the lion." And so that's one of my favorite moments in the book. So, what was your overall impression of the show, Swan?
Oh, my overall impression, I remember just all through the play, and then at the end, just kind of like, I was giddy. I was giddy for days afterwards. I'm still a little bit geeky about it. There was like, okay, especially the first time I saw it, because I saw it twice. But the first time I was most just kind of in awe of finally seeing a story that I had read and imagined in my head, sometimes multiple times a year, but like throughout all of my life. I can barely remember before I read it. I think I was quite young when my mom read it to me for the first time, and I think she did the voices and stuff. And before then, I knew Narnia from BBC Narnia and from like abridged cassette tapes of Magician's Nephew and The Last Battle. And then, but anyway, from fairly early on in my life, The Horse and His Boy has been like a big part of it, as well as Narnia in general. And so there's never been a visual adaptation of The Horse and His Boy before, to my knowledge. There might have been another play in the Philippines, but yeah, they're kind of out of reach. And so then there was, and then there's a pretty good radio theater drama from Focus on the Family, but to have it adapted visually in front of me, and just to be there in person to see it, was an incredible experience. And there were a lot of moments that I felt it really resonated with me as they resonated from the book, and even stuff that kind of added to it and fleshed out the story a bit, or seeing it physically happen is a different dimension than reading a story. And so you're also experiencing somebody else's imagination of the story, and so that kind of fleshes it out a bit. But mostly, like, everything that was exactly from the book is what got me the most excited. And I think that's a summary of my overall thoughts.
I think that it's funny that you say that there's never been a visual representation of The Horse and His Boy, because I seem to recall you were working on a claymation version for a while.
Unfinished clay animation. I'll link in the description. I have portions of it are finished. I'm kind of tempted to try again, but I was very ambitious in high school, and I was like, I was going to do the whole book.
Very cool. And Kestrel, what was your overall takeaway?
So a bit background, I actually went to high school in Greenville, South Carolina, so I know the area fairly well, which is why I was so blown away by the quality of the production, because I had actually never known that the Logos Theater even existed until Christy reached out on the Facebook page and asked if anyone wanted to go, and I was like, oh, like I know that area. So I think it was just super amazing to see like a small community theater, a local theater. First of all, it was packed to the brim, and they actually told us afterwards that they were talking about expanding to a much larger theater, and they actually had gotten like the resources for that already, which I thought was just super amazing. I'm a huge proponent of like local theater and local art, so that was like what kind of struck me, what was my biggest takeaway from that. But also, I love theater adaptations, like especially compared to movies. I think a lot of like theater conventions, like things that you can get away with on theater that you can't really get away with in the movie, just added so much more to it, like the puppets, for example. But also, I think Christy was going to talk about this more later, so I'm not going to steal it from her. But the way they did the set and move and like the horses running, things like that were just really, really cool. And you wouldn't be able to get that kind of stylization on the big screen, but it works so well on stage.
That's an interesting point. It's a point I made about the animated version of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, is that you can have that Aslan who's as big as an elephant, and it works. It's harder to do that live without it looking slightly off, and that's something they're able to do with the puppet, is also make him as large as the horses.
Yeah.
Which is very, very cool. And then Lil?
Oh, what did I like? Everything. I liked pretty much everything. Yeah, I've only seen 2 Narnia plays in my life, but I've been to a good deal of musicals and plays and stuff like that over the years, and I've listened to the Focus on the Family audio drama so many times and just imagined it in my mind, and it just really delivered so much, so that at the end, when Aslan was roaring and everything, my heart was just beating in my chest as if I'd really lived it.
Yeah. Yeah, I was blown away. I've attended a lot of theater. I've attended things in New York and West End, and a really excellent regional theater up on the Central Coast. And this is about the most fun I can remember ever having at a play, and that's really saying something.
Mm-hmm.
Because I remember just sometimes you're in a show and you sort of feel like, okay, I'm tired, which I was tired. We were there and back to Greenville in about 35 hours. And so, I was sitting there going, I'm really tired, but you're just, some shows you're like, is this over yet? Can I go home and, sleep, or can I? And I was just so in the moment and just enjoying where I was, which is hard to do in life anyway. We're always thinking ahead and looking ahead. And I was just sitting there going, I am having so much fun. This show is so much fun. And really, really well done. And yeah, you never know. Regional theater, community theater is always a mixed bag, and you never quite know what you're going to get in an adaptation. But I wish I lived near them, because I would be getting season passes. Even the presentations for the things, I think Kestrel's thinking about that herself, and that thumbs up there. The other things they were doing looked really good too. I'm like, I'd go see that. I'd go see that. So really, just so many, props to the show's creators. So I'd like to go around and Swan, one of the questions I'd like to address to the group is there a particular scene or something particular to the adaptation that you thought just worked especially well?
I've got a list, but I'll pick one.
And I should warn before we continue to the audience, if you are planning to see the show, because I know that the show's ending this weekend, but it hopefully will revive again in the future. That this is a somewhat spoilery discussion for the play and definitely for the book. So
Yeah.
we're assuming if you're watching a Narnia podcast, you've probably read the book. But, all right, go ahead, Swan.
The cat puppet, I think, was one of my favorite parts because they could interact. The cat, who is for everyone who's been spoiled already, essentially Aslan is Aslan. It is you can interact with it, and it can be present in a scene in ways that the full lion puppet not necessarily is. And also the movement they have for the cat puppetry is maybe some of the best. And they have like, I don't know, it's ridiculous. They have the number of people they have moving like every single like joint on this cat puppet and doing like the very cat like body language. What I found was really interesting is that they had the cat in a very early scene where with a young actress for Shasta, but it's not. They don't make it clear it could be a different cat, but the idea is really just what if it was Aslan with him there as a kid when he's been just been like beaten up by Arshish and he's like feeling really low and he goes out and almost throws a stone at the cat. Like, and so we have in the book where when he's in the tombs and he's with the cat there, that he remembers, he makes a comment about having, I once threw stones at a half-starved, mangy old stray cat or whatever, and he sort of confesses this. But to have that in there, to show that point in his life was kind of neat, and then to have it be, and then they bring that back. They have him almost throw a stone at Aslan in the tombs when the lion is coming, he's scared. So it's kind of like him being self-defensive and almost trying to lash out at the one who's actually there to help him, actually there to save him, and then Aslan still coming and protecting him and comforting him. In both of those scenes, kind of mirroring each other was really neat. And so whether or not it's intended to be Aslan in both scenes, I thought that was really cool. And so both those scenes were some favorites, were a standout for me from the play.
And Cass, same question. Was there a particular either scene or an element that was brought to the project that you really thought worked?
So I really enjoyed the some of the set pieces, Arshish's hut set piece and the hermit's hut. I thought it was just really cool the way that they had them as cutaways on the turntable so that the characters could walk in and out of the doors that they had, but then like it was still a turn to show them inside the house. And that, I mean, it's also just a product of them having a turntable in the first place. I think they told us they're like one of the few theaters in the South that actually has a turntable, which I think they used to very good effect. Yes. So not just with that, of course, but like that set design, I think is what really, what I really enjoyed the most and what really impressed me.
That was one thing it just occurred to me a little earlier this evening that I almost wonder if the Hermit's home was a recycled beaver's dam. It was really cool, but just the dome shape of it. And the only reason I don't know is because most theaters can't reasonably keep such large set pieces. They have to build and unbuild such things, especially if they're not flat. But it was, I mean, it worked perfectly for the Hermit. I'm not saying, hey, that looks recycled. It was, yeah, it was such a nice piece and such a big set piece for that scene.
Yeah. I think it could have been. I mean, especially if they had been planning on doing every single Narnia book, like when they did The Land of Witch and Wardrobe, it wouldn't be, out of the realm possibility for them to have maybe devised a way to make sure that it can be like stored really easily so that it could come back in later on. I mean, who knows? They might have also used it for Truffle Hunter's like house in Prince Caspian 2 or something. So it's been coming to use every single year.
Right, that's a good point. The other point being that I get the feeling that they maybe have more storage available than just they mentioned that below the stage, and this is the case in many theaters, there's about 4 feet, of stage where they of space, but beneath the stage where they keep set pieces and things like that, which are usually things that can be recycled. But I know that since there is also a very large prop collection involved from the feature films, that there it may be that part of whatever, I'm not saying they have a warehouse, but they certainly have some kind of storage unit. Possibly they're able to keep a couple more things like that than they otherwise most theaters would have. But yeah, I hadn't thought about Truffle Hunter's house. That would be interesting to see if we could find some footage and compare. But certainly used to excellent effect. And Lil, did you have a favorite scene or effect or something that was brought to the table that you thought was really good? Of course, none of us are even completely touching on the puppets. Well, Swan touched some on the puppets, but I mean that's kind of the big thing that was just like, there are these giant horse puppets. But was there a scene or something that you'd like to discuss?
Okay, well, I'm gonna try and sum it down to 2 things or so. One of the things I really liked a lot was the scenes that they created to add to the play, especially like after the fight on the Winding Arrow, when they've gone to rescue Prince Kor and they find out he's not there, and Lord Bar is dead, and just the performance that the guy playing King Loon did when he like took off his crown and like got down on his knees and like gave this heart-wrenching scream of anguish. It was really good. And
I felt that.
Also in the tombs of the ancient, or not the tombs, sorry, the halls of the Tisrock, where they just had a bunch of arches that they kept on like moving. That was really, and also other places where they did similar things with moving the trees to kind of show movement and confusion within the old palace. It was just that really impressed me. Yeah. But I liked a lot of the extra scenes too.
Agreed. Yeah, that was one of the things in it. I mean, I'm sure other shows have probably done it, but it's not something I've seen very much, where you've got Shasta running through the forest to reach King Loon, and he's on the turntable. He can't get very far, but you've got then all these different stagehands just running past with trees, and it looks like he is moving, and it was incredibly effective. And that was just one of the things that's not even, it doesn't occur to you as like, oh, that's a super hard effect. No, it was a relative. I mean, yes, you've got to build the trees and not have your actors fall over. They've got to have some good balance there, but it's like, that is such a simple effect, a practical effect, and it just works. Now, for myself, besides the puppets, which we'll deal with in some more depth in a minute, I really thought they handled all the flashbacks well. And I don't just mean the prologue. I did enjoy the prologue a great deal. And as Lil said, it gives us an empathy for King Loon that is incredibly helpful. He's one of my favorite characters anyway. The deeper you look at what's actually going on in that story, I did a painting of him once and posted some thoughts with it, and on Facebook. And you've got this king. He's getting a little chubby. Not so much the guy in the show, but they were all broad-chested, healthy men, So I wasn't standing there going like, he's too skinny or it was Loon, and it was great and it was fine. And but I mean, King Loon, you've got this kind of middle-aged king. His wife's died. He used to be a great warrior. He's kind of gone to seed, but he's still gonna lead the charge out that door at Anvar at the battle, because he is the king and it's his duty to go first
in every desperate attack.
That's right. And he has found this boy who is pretty clearly his son, and he's lost him, and he has to shut the gates of Anvard knowing he's outside. And it's just heart-wrenching when you really think it through.
Whoa. Yeah.
And they, not that they addressed all of these issues in the play, but this is why Luna's one of my favorite characters. And so they gave us a little more time with him, and yes, just that, he's trying to get the information out of Lord Barr, and Lord Barr's already dead, and you're just like, oh, and but the other thing they do with the flashback scenes that I thought was really interesting is that they move in and out of them pretty gracefully.
Yeah.
This is a real giveaway, but there's that famous line where Erebus is sitting, she is telling her story to Shasta and Bree and Hwin, and she's talking about why she doesn't want to marry Ahashta. And she says he is of base birth and he's 60 years old and his face resembles that of an ape. Yeah. And then suddenly the lighting changes. She's in the same place, but suddenly the lighting is off of the horses and Shasta, and she's in a crowded ballroom, and everyone gasps, and Ahashta is sitting there, and clearly she said this to his face.
I don't think that, but it is hilarious.
What's that?
I mean, I have mixed feelings about that, but it is hilarious.
Yeah. What are your thoughts?
Oh,
I can see how you can feel either way about that.
Right. Well, or the way that he said that to his face. I mean, maybe it's okay. That doesn't happen in the book, but I can, and for the play, I can accept that. But just that, the way it seems a little simplified, or a little bit like too upfront, the way she told her father she didn't want to marry him. If you use that line, like that line is what she would say, not to his face or not to her father, I think. But I mean, it doesn't have to be super ultra realistic and like to the book in the play. So that's
sure. I can see that being taken either way. I thought it was a very funny transition.
It was very funny. I did enjoy it. Yeah.
The other one I thought was pretty funny, although again not quite as described in the book, is you go with Shasta and Corin, and they've just met. They're sitting together, and I believe they're holding up a platter because they're looking at their reflections, trying to make sure they match. And then, Shasta's like, "Where have you been?" And Corin gets up, and he says, "Well, I met this boy who said a foul thing about Susan, so I knocked him down." He knocks him down with the platter that he was holding in the other scene. He doesn't just, and that keeps happening, he with different props kind of almost flowing from one scene into another, worked in a very interesting way that I thought was quite funny, even if not quite book accurate.
Yeah, I love that too. The storytelling, that was one of the things I put on my list, is being able to tell stories where the person telling the story is both acting their part in the story they're telling and still speaking to the person who is like there on stage they're talking to, but it's never confusing. It always works really well. Like my favorite, like at the very beginning when Arshish is telling about how he found Shasta in the boat as a baby, and the boat comes up into his house, and he's like there picking it up, but like at the same time talking to the Tarkan in his hut, is like, I thought that was beautiful, and they kept doing that in a bunch of different ways, and it was one of the like the cleverest or best played out things in the play.
Yeah, and they did that really well with the Erebus flashbacks, just because, like, even though the light was off the horses and Shasta, like, you could tell you were still meant to look at them, because, like, you could see Shasta's reactions, and the puppeteers, which again we'll get to in a bit, were also still, like, working on the horses' reactions, even though they were, like, not lit at all, basically. And then every so often, like, Erebus would turn her head back to explain something to Shasta that, like, she felt like he couldn't understand anything, but like something that she especially felt she needed to explain. So it was clear that she was reliving it maybe, but still like telling the story, and Shasta still, like, he still cut in at some points, if I remember correctly, to like just interject and like make a comment about what she was doing or like what was happening around her and stuff, which I thought was really cool and spoke a lot to those scene transitions.
Yeah, I really liked that too. I really thought that was really well done in that showing, kind of the story as it happened, but also like still having the characters on the stage so you could tell that it was a story being told.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So then the let's see. Well, let's take a break for a minute. Let's talk about these fabulous puppets, because I think part of what really works in this show that it takes it up to that next level. Again, there's a theater on the Central Coast that's a small theater that's called PCPA, that's associated with Allen Hancock College, and they perform in Santa Maria and Solvang. And I've seen several Narnia plays before, and some were disappointing. One was adequate, and theirs was the only one that really, I thought there was some really good stuff in this. Except I felt the music, it was a musical, and I felt the numbers were a little bit lackluster. But what they brought was such wonderful costume design, because they have that ability to, and great performances. They have an ability at that particular theater to elevate any script they had. They had a slightly, in that case, mostly good but lacking in a couple areas script. Whereas here I thought they started with a fairly good script, not flawless, but quite good. And then they were able to add many things. But this one feature, of course, really stands out. And these are these enormous puppets. The horses are as big as Clydesdales, because you've got to have two performers, adult performers, under the shoulders and under the tail end, controlling, not attached to their legs, but controlling the front hoofs. And then you've got another actor off to the side controlling the head, and making them, the horses can rear and they can walk, and the ears can rotate to show distress or fear or anger, and they can gallop, and they can take a rider, which, did they say they're 60 to 80 pounds before the rider?
Something like that.
Yeah.
So it's, you could kind of tell why later in the show you have that third horse that Shasta rides, that's a not talking horse. And he's on him for a minute, and he's kind of kicking at him, and he's not going anywhere. And Shasta finally gives up and gets off and lets him go and says, I guess I'll get somewhere by walking. And I kind of get the feeling that that's because that would be asking a lot of the performers to have to carry him for that entire scene with Aslan.
That's a good point.
But so that's part of the reality of a performance. But just, what did you think of the performance of these puppets? And we also had the cat, which I'm so glad they included, and Aslan himself.
It was amazing. I think, because you had the feeling of this full horse, and as soon as I got past the fact that the horse couldn't move its mouth to the words, that's quite understandable. It just felt, once I accepted that it is the horse speaking, that it was perfect. It was Brie, and it looked exactly like Brie. It's like a big gray dappled horse, and it's every now and then, I'll see some adaptation or some visual or fan art or something where Bree isn't the way he's described in the book, like he's just a brown horse or something like that. And I'm like, no, that's not Bree. And it just made me really happy, and particularly the ears, because there's lots of moments in the book. It's just a small detail, they could have not done that, and they just whatever. It feels like it would be a lot of extra hassle to think about moving the ears on this puppet. But they, several times in the book, C.S. Lewis describes Bree's ears as going slightly back, or twitching, or when he's really scared that they're laid back in his skull, kind of thing. And so to be able to see that take place was amazing.
Yeah, not to harp on this whole thing about about the stage versus the screen, but I actually really appreciate the stylization that they were able to achieve with the puppets. So the horses weren't full body costumes or whatever. You could definitely see the performers both under it, and the chief puppeteer who was working with the head. And then the neck, for example, if I remember correctly, the necks weren't, they were ribbed, and they didn't there wasn't a covering, I guess. So you could see that it was a puppet, but I think that itself added more to the performance, just because like you could at the same time, while appreciating Bree and Huynh as characters, you could still appreciate all the work that went into them. And then with the Aslan, I was very impressed by the Aslan puppet, especially. I know like he's been around for longer than the horses have, but I know we've posted pictures, but so basically Aslan is much less realistic than the horses were. He is textured like bark, I guess, and his face almost looks like a mask. It's all in one piece, including the mane. And of course he's huge. That was the other thing. And I just really love that interpretation of Aslan, because even though there is this whole thing about how Aslan's a beast, just like us, that's a big part of kind of bringing Bree down to earth with his, like, you know, his perception of Narnia, his perception of himself. I still really enjoyed how they were able to set Aslan apart as like something else, as a power greater than what the horses were, or even the, for example. And with the cat too, like the cat was definitely much larger than any real cat would be. And again, while that was partially because they needed to be able to articulate it and make sure the audience, even in the back, could see what the cat was doing, at the same time, to me at least, it does feel like they're setting the cat and Aslan apart as something greater than everything else going on.
Yeah.
Yeah, Lil?
Yeah, I thought they were great.
It's something that was there more you wanted to say, or
Not really. I thought they were great. And you know, I mean, there is a certain degree of when you're like watching it, like your analytical brain is like telling you there's people there just leading it around. But it was so well done that you could just forget really that there were people there and just focus on the play. And like so many times I found myself like just watching it and like watching the puppets and like forgetting almost forgetting really that they were being you know I don't know what the word is, but like manipulated and animated and stuff like that. And I just that was really impressive too, like the puppeteers all dressed in dark colors, so you weren't really focused on them anyway. So yeah, it was all good things all around.
Yeah.
yeah, I was just thoroughly impressed. I almost feel like if I ever got to see one of the others, one of the other shows, because I know that the desire seems to be to do all 7 of these, from what I can tell, and they've done the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and Prince Caspian, and I'd feel like I might miss them, because you know the horses are such a big part of this, and that adds to the spectacle really of this show. And some of theater is spectacle. I mean, you're wanting the emotion, but there is something where you're like, oh my goodness, there are 2 enormous horses and they're galloping toward me on the stage before the lights cut, which the lights, you know, keep having to cut or they would fall off the stage. But you know, when you know that that's not going to be in each show, although I suppose if they wanted horse effects, they could certainly, now that they built these, bring them back for other shows. I suppose
Unicorn.
to Jewel the Unicorn or some of those puzzle.
Strawberry.
Yes.
Strawberry. There we go.
Fledge.
There we go. Yeah, I'd love to see them do Magician's Nephew. That would be amazing. Yes, just a really excellent performance there by the puppeteers. Absolutely as worthy of recognition as any of the actors on stage. Before we get to the actors, did anybody see anything they wanted to mention as far as, you know, room for improvement in the show? I know we've had some conversations that there were a couple places where the script could have worked better, but is there anything anybody wanted to
Kinda. Let me think. I have notes. I guess with noticing like the second time seeing it too, that there are like places where it's like, and maybe this isn't needed for a play, especially when you have like for smaller kids and when you're summing stuff up, that it's kind of less subtle and a little bit like on the nose in places or things that they clear up. Or sometimes when they did time jumps, I thought that was a little bit awkward seeing it on stage versus like the lights go out, but you're the same characters, just now you understand that things are later. They call Tosh Bane a village, which I don't see why that's necessary.
I think the impression I got from that line, because it was Shasta who said it like that, it's a large village. The impression that I got was that he had never seen a city before. And
True.
that's because he just did not have a term for like a city the size of Toshban. That was what I got from it, but like
it works. But why since Shasta had and why do they not know about Tashbane? It seemed as if they didn't, but that's okay. I mean, that's obviously a very tiny detail, and it's just things that I react to as an ultra fan.
I think that I agree. I think the impression we were supposed to get is that Shasta had never seen anything bigger, but and the reason it probably happened is because we do lose that entire planning section of how are we going to get through Tashband, how are we going to do this, except for the very brief mention of let's cut our tails. It's been a because in The Horse and His Boy, it's a real tense thing. They know they're approaching this, but you feel like I think that is why they did it. But it jars sometimes, especially once you get in there and you realize this can't be a village because this is clearly the capital. But I think that's probably the explanation, is that that's Shasta's point of view, and that he says a village because he's never seen anything bigger, and then it's kind of a cut because the audience doesn't have the knowledge necessary yet to frame what Tashban is.
Yeah.
Go ahead. What you were.
I guess if I think over the things that I didn't like as much, it's usually I understand that they had to cut things down for time, and so it's like simpler or a little bit awkward because they kind of had to like carve it out. Like when they skip the desert and then suddenly like Bree, like Shasta is literally pulling on Bree, which is so different from like their book dynamic that I was like, what? Like Bree is being stubborn, but he is so much like the alpha male of the group that everybody just kind of like accepts it. And so in the book, it's like he everybody kind of accepts that he knows best because he's so confident. So to have like, yes, he's being stubborn there, but it's a very different scene if all of them are like, Bree, come, and he's like lying there and Shasta's literally pulling on his rope.
Is this when he wants to stop for a mouth of grass before going on?
They're coming. We need to go. And so, but I understand if you need to fast forward that scene and to get all the points across, and that's the easiest way to do it, is to like it just kind of like I felt I reacted to that. And then there's the.
Can I cut in here real fast, Swan? So going off of what you were saying about like the pacing, I guess, and how long it was. So I do remember the actor who played Older Core, I think Older Core told us that it was originally clocking in at like 3 hours long. So like definitely, it was still ran like 2.5 hours. But at the same time, like to me, one of the biggest things they lost was the development of Shasta and Aravis's like friendship, because the way it was portrayed is that to me, at least, the impression that I got was that Aravis's opinion of Shasta like had a complete like turnaround, basically at the moment where Shasta jumped off Bree to go help her and Quinn, which isn't the impression like you get really from the book. Like it's more of like a gradual like building of like this friendship and respect. And I think because there's that sudden change, to me, I am a sucker for like friends to lovers stories. So I think for me, it kind of just like, I don't know. It did lose a bit of that for me, especially like with like the actual wedding scene later on. But at the same time, like with their time constraints, I understand why that happened. But that is something that just I wanted to bring up.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah.
What surprises me is at 2.5 hours, it didn't feel long.
No.
It did not. No.
another hour of it.
Go ahead, Swan.
Yeah. I was trying to think. Well, speaking of something though that didn't get cut, that thankfully didn't get cut, we were talking to the actor for Corin, and his story about beating up the guys in Tash Bay and everybody he knocked down almost got cut, but they were like, okay, you can do it. You just got to do it fast, and they like they just sped it up a bit and got it and fit it in, which I was glad because that's probably one of my favorite parts.
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, anything else?
This is more of a funny nitpick, but the second time I saw it from the balcony and the scene where the Lord Bar is on the ship and he dies, and it's great when you see it from below and you don't realize he has the arrow sticking in his back until he falls over and pretends to be like hit by the arrow. But from the balcony you can see it the whole time.
Oh,
The arrow sticking out of his back. So I thought that was kind of funny. Like, I mean, obviously seeing it the second time I knew, but it was pretty obvious from up there.
that's cool. Did you find, actually, with the puppets, now some of us were sitting up in about the fourth row the first night, and I almost felt that the horses worked a little better at a distance, as far as maybe believability, but it wasn't like, I don't know. I mean, on the other hand, I can hardly complain for being in the fourth row. I really enjoyed seeing the horses up close, and you could kind of see more of what was happening with them. But how did you find your experience change sitting further back besides that?
Well, there were times I was on the very edge of the balcony because I got a very last minute seat.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it was better on where we were the first night.
Mm-hmm.
Because sometimes I couldn't quite see like characters that were coming in from the edge, just from where I was sitting. But it was still kind of neat to see a different perspective and still look amazing. Yeah.
Okay, Cass, is there anything in the show that you'd like to bring up that you think there's room for improvement?
I think the one, I guess, interesting thing that I noticed was the portrayal of like the Kellermeans, especially the women. I think so most of the actresses did have like long black wavy wigs, which like of course adds a lot to the milieu. But what I found, I was a bit confused by was that they had a dark blonde girl playing Erebus, and they didn't give her a wig, but they did give her face paint, which had a really interesting effect that I wasn't sure I was a huge fan of. And Christy, you had mentioned earlier that you had seen other promo pictures where she was wearing the wig. So I think
like
it might be just like
or darkened her hair or something.
Malfunction or something. I don't know. It might just be like what we saw, but I think with that kind of like took me out. It fiddled with the immersion, I think, was a huge part of it. And of course, The Horse and His Boy is a story that takes place in not like a Europe analog with characters of color. And again, this is also South Carolina, and being like a woman of color growing up in South Carolina, I do understand there are a lot of constraints that you just can't find actors. But in that case, there still kind of is that milieu. I think other than that, they did do pretty well in just kind of not basing it directly off of any one culture, any one like region, but just kind of presenting it just in opposition to Narnia and Arkenland, and just showing they're not the same, but not really putting either of them like directly on anything in our world. Which I always think is a problem that a lot of fantasy adaptations, that just a lot of fantasy in general runs into. So I did appreciate that they didn't really do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was something I noticed that the one thing that was interesting was that Erebus actually appeared to keep more of her culture at the end. Instead of, I always assumed that, she gets integrated into King Loon's court and she and Lucy go off to plan her wardrobe and everything. You assume all they've got there is going to be Arkenland tailors and seamstresses, but they immediately produce a very jewel-heavy dress, but it does keep to her culture, and that's kind of an interesting choice. And the same with the wedding gown later. Yes, Swan has a comment.
In the book where she decides that she prefers like northern fashions for men. So specifically for men, that actually implies that she still likes Clorman like women's clothes, and so it makes sense that she would keep that. I always sort of imagine her at least partly like incorporating elements from her own culture into into her continuing life.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have other things you'd like to go into?
Okay, other like compliments.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, I was asking Cass if she had other things.
No, I think that was it. Yeah, no,
Okay.
it's all good.
Okay, and then Lil, did you have areas where you felt like was room for improvement, or you would change anything?
Not really. I mean,
Yeah.
I have no complaints.
Oh yeah, I just remembered actually. The timeline. I think. Yeah, I ran into some timeline confusion when I was driving back. To be fair, it was also almost midnight, so I was also just tired. But so the centaur scene, what you're talking about, Lil, remind me of this because the King Loon and I don't remember his queen's name. I know they named her.
She doesn't get when they called her
named
queen.
her in the play.
Did
I
they?
seem to recall they mentioned a name or someone
I
did,
thought
but I think it started with E. Anyway, sorry. So they were presenting their babies to the centaur, but the centaur was also in Care Paravel with like the Pevensies beside him, and they were all full grown, which I was like,
oh,
pretty, yeah. So I think especially that also helps. Yeah, they should still be children.
Yeah.
I think, but again, like it's with the actors and keeping that continuity, which is, I guess, more important in a stage adaptation. But then with that, and then at the end, is this spoilery? Should I say it?
Go ahead.
So at the end, like one of the very last lines is Edmund coming to find Susan, and he's like, "Oh, Peter has plans for us. He wants us to go hunt the white stag," which then would imply they're towards the end of their reign, which does not really fall in line with the rest of the timeline because Lucy also tells the story of how they came through the wardrobe at the banquet that they hold after defeating the Calormenes, which would imply that Lucy at least remembers everything about England when by the time they return through the wardrobe, they barely remember anything. Like it's all as if they were in the dream. I don't know if they would forget all of that so quickly, or if that's just part of like the magic of the lamppost or something like that. So that was kind of my other thing, was a few timeline snarls, but like they made sense. So
I would say as far as that, I'm sorry. I'll let Swan go.
I think that scene with we're gonna go hunt the white stag is after Coronavirus's wedding, so that would be like another 10 years in the future.
Okay, yeah.
But I think actually by the timeline, by the official timeline like that C.S. Lewis made, that they actually do go back to England fairly soon after the events of The Horse and His Boy.
Okay.
Right. So Lewis actually, for continuity, makes it worse.
Yeah.
Because she's telling the story, and then within about a year, if you go by the timeline, some people don't, then within about a year they're gone. And also, the whole region is called Lantern Waste, and yet they're what is this thing? It gives light. Like an iron tree. Okay. Yes, Lil.
So one thing was that I really liked about the script was when they're talking about this, I felt like they particularly covered this. Like, so I think it was Edmund asks, he says, do you miss Mother? And they kind of talk about that, and his response after they talk about it, one of his responses is something about like how he remembers some things very clearly, but other things not very much at all, which I felt like was kind of like touching on that whole like not remembering things but as in a dream, so that like I felt like it made perfect to me at least perfect continuity sense in that they can remember things like their parents or are missing them, at least somebody, but they don't like remember like necessarily all of England, like, and to a certain extent, there is the thing where even just like I've noticed this in real life, when you move from one town to another and you stop traversing the same roads as much, you kind of all that stuff that becomes familiar to you, that you're like, oh, well, we turn at this pine tree right here, kind of goes back into the back of your mind, and the dust and the cobwebs. So
It was something with that scene. This is a final epilogue scene between Edmund and Susan, and it's a show that's very much aware that it's part of a series, which is very interesting. It's not trying to stand alone, which of all the Narnia stories, this and Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe are the two that can stand alone somewhat. This is very much a nod to both Susan's future, as you can see some of what she's thinking, and also to the end of the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and leading into Prince Caspian. So it's a very interesting scene as far as the way it works there. I wanted to bring some attention as well to the costumes and props. Now, Logos was blessed to, they have a partnership with a man who collected many of the original props and costumes from the films, which is one of the things that I, whether you liked all the films or not, or if you had quibblings with the script, I mean, I thought the representation of the Golden Age and the design aesthetic is absolutely magnificent. And I challenge anyone to find a more beautiful war camp than that, than all those pavilions. But what was nice is because they have those costumes available now, they actually can use some of them in the show. Now, they are not using the Pevensy's hero costumes, as far as I could tell. Those are all on display and carefully preserved, and you could actually see some of those before the show and during intermission, which is amazing, and the gifts as well. But they had some other shows. I believe Edmund was wearing a costume that belonged to one of the Telmarine lords in Voyage of the Dawn Treader. And also, I thought they did a really good job of then, besides some of these existing costume pieces, Mr. Tumnus on top was also wearing, I believe, some costume elements that came from a tunic or something that was maybe a fawn battle tunic, because I actually have like the child's version from the, it's like a costume version that Stansborough Wool sold. But it was kind of cool though, because he was also wearing a little shoulder brooch, and I'm like, I have that shoulder brooch, because that was something I was able to get offline. Somebody had sold it on eBay and didn't know what it was, and we were able to identify it as a piece from a centaur's costume. So that was kind of cool. I'm like, oh, I've got the same brooch. And then the other thing they were able to do was to bring in some of the textiles, especially the banners that are in the scenes where there's royalty. And they were able to bring those in on poles. So they had, for example, this banner and several others that are original to the film. At the same time, without letting the film props and costumes overwhelm the show and make you feel like they stole the whole Walden Media show and now they're just redoing the characters and everybody is styled exactly the same way. And Mr. Tumnus, for example, he's not, bare-chested and hairy arms. He's wearing a tunic up top and he's got furry legs, and it works really well. And a lot of the animals also have some very nice costume designs with minimal fur and just like little, suggestions of like rabbit ears. things like that. But what I really loved too, the way that the costume designer brought in the same aesthetic, that very pre-Raphaelite and 14th century Europe aesthetic, and blended it in with the pieces that they already had from the films. And I thought they did a very good job with that. And I'm also glad they didn't try to, say, fully replicate some of those hero costumes, like the hunting costumes. Lucy's is a little similar. She's got a kind of red and gold, but Lucy seems to appear in red and gold a lot in the Walden films, and it works for her. But you know, because you don't want to see the characters and feel like, oh, they only have one outfit. Yeah, they're royalty and they should have a variety. And yet, this seems like, oh yeah, the person who made that, you know, your seamstress would probably make something like this, and this is your style, and it all feels really good. Susan had some very interesting sleeves in one of the dresses.
I think Lucy's battle costume was
Yeah.
at least very reminiscent of the one Susan wore in Prince Caspian.
Yeah, I didn't get a good look at it, but it
was
did
like,
seem...
yeah, it was a long green dress with like short kind of trumpet sleeves and and like a leather bodice. So it reminded me a lot, which like makes sense because that was an archer's like armor. So yeah,
that's cool. I really like the Lucy in the show because I was talking to the actress who played her at the end, and it's not like a really big part, but really I think really good where she is, and she was talking, and she said so something about saying that she didn't think she looked, or you know, some sort of like apology, but maybe not like looking like Lucy is supposed to look or something. And I was like, no, you look exactly like Lucy, because she, like, as Lucy as described in the books, she is like perfectly matches the description in my imagination of the character of Lucy. And even though it's like different in the films and, you know, other adaptations, I was surprised, and I thought she was the perfect Lucy.
I thought they did a great job with that.
I just have one more thing to say.
Yeah.
I just really, when we went backstage, because of the backstage passes, I really appreciated how friendly everyone is. I mean, to a certain extent, you would expect them to be, but just I really felt like everybody was really honestly warm and friendly, even though they've done this play how many times and had how many people probably come up and talk to them. So that was just one thing I appreciated. The actors were willing to have like conversations with you. They weren't just like here because this is the thing that we have to do. So that was just something I wanted to say specifically for the people themselves.
Yeah.
Well, and one thing, I mean, that I think I can mention this is you had your family with you, and you know they realized that your grandma needed a chair, and they like brought out a throne for her to sit on, which was, I mean, how kind is that? They're like, you know, we recognize royalty when we see it. I mean, they were just so awesome and genuine. It was really such a lovely cast and crew.
Yeah.
And then I wanted to ask, did you have any favorite performance, a favorite actor or actress, or just somebody you thought took it to the next level?
Shall I go first?
Go ahead.
Well, my favorite character has always been Edmund, and it gets more so all the time. I just really liked the actor who plays Edmund. That may be out of just favoritism for the character, but I really liked his performance. And I know Kiss will probably want to say a little something about Corn. I also enjoyed his performance too. So yeah, I I've overstated myself probably, but I really just enjoyed everything about this play. The music, the costumes, the stage, just everything. It was definitely a very special occasion, and I'm glad that I got to be able to celebrate it as a birthday gift.
Oh, that's great. I'm glad we got to see it with you. And Edmund actually was the director. And a very, very nice person. I got to speak to him a little afterwards. Okay, well, I guess that's a good transition into Kes then.
Yeah, so as Lo knows, my favorite performance was Corin's. And so Corin in this play was like he really is like pretty like a lot of a comedic relief character, but even more so in this play. And I do place a lot of, as a performer of speech and debate kid, I definitely place a lot of value on like physical comedy, and Corin was brilliant with that. I think like Christian, actually I don't know if Christian mentioned this during our review or before, but when Corin and Cor first meet, when Corin and Shasta first meet, they have the silver platter on which Tumnus had brought food to Shasta beforehand. And so they're passing back and forth, looking at each other, comparing it using it as a mirror. And then Shasta asks, like, where have you been? And then Corin's like, oh, I heard someone talking about, like, saying bad things about Queen Susan. So I knocked him down. And he does it with the platter. And I just thought that was just super clever. And just things like that he does. And when he gets knocked down too, I think they were just brilliant. And the other things that I got to speak with him, the actor, a bit afterwards, and I also spoke again with the actor who played Edmund. And so apparently, while the actor who played Shasta has been in like kind of this family for ages, the actor who played Corin actually moved down from Virginia for a year, got a job in Greenville just to be part of this play. I think that again goes to show how dedicated this entire cast and crew is to what they're doing. And I think just hearing that made me like I just really admired him even more, like beyond just as a good actor, but like just the amount of dedication and love that they've put into this production.
Yeah, that's amazing.
That's really incredible. Yeah, there were a couple other things with Corin's performance because it was also one of my favorites, where he was such a teenager. He did this little eye roll thing. You could tell he is not going to listen about not being in the battle. And you could see where this is the kind of kid who was going to need to, if he was going to squire and become a knight, was probably going to be needed taken in hand a few times by his father or his authority figures. And it was just very funny to watch. He just made him. He became more of a person. I don't know. It almost. You could definitely see this guy taking on a bear because there was just so much attitude there.
Yeah, Corin Thunderfist.
Yes.
Yeah, it was almost like he was like laid back, but also like didn't care. He was like, "So, I knocked the boy down." And then,
yeah.
And it was just sort of this, like, when he's relating the tale, it's just like this, it doesn't matter to him at all. He's not fazed by it whatsoever. He's just cool. It's just another day in the life. This is what happens to him all the time.
What was it he said he was doing? Like princely duties?
Royal business.
Royal business, that's what it was, yeah.
A good way to put it. Yeah.
That was actually a really good piece of acting too at the very end when he suddenly realizes that he is not going to be king, and you watch, and as the audience, especially if you hadn't read the book, you're watching and you're going, he's working it out. What's his reaction going to be? And you get the feeling that he hasn't decided completely yet because he's still working it out, and then he is, of course, over the moon about it, which I thought was just this really good, because it's hard to do that kind of slow burn, without it feeling dumb. And he did very, very well on that scene and brought something that because in the movie he just kind of blurts it out, "Yay!" I'm still not in the movie, in the book. So
Yeah.
I thought that was also a very nice piece of acting on Corin's part.
That was good. Trying to think of some other actors who really stood out. I think Shasta was pretty good. I mean,
He really,
he was good because he's in it the most. And I thought, I found him believable as Shasta. I think the guy who played Arshish and then also Tumnus was one that I thought was pretty good. That kind of stood out to me. I kind of found him believable as both. Which is good that he can be two characters in the same play that both work quite well, I think. And the guy who played the Hermit. Just something about, I mean, he's not in it for very much, and I don't think he's really given that much to work with, but I think he himself, like, sells the character pretty well, and his performance I really liked. And I think those are probably some of my favorites as I'm thinking now.
There really were not, that I could find, any weak performances, which is so unusual, again, in community theater. Everyone was solid. There was, I'm going to go into several of these. I probably would have chosen Corin as the standout performance, but Rabidash, he brings this little bit of, I'm slightly insane, and I'd better get what I want. And he's not on there a lot. They do not focus on the villains. They actually cut away from a lot of In the House of the Tisrock.
Mm-hmm.
But you get this conversation between him and Edmund, and they sort of combine two scenes from the book, where he, says, "Well, you can go home, little goatfoot, as long as you leave me my bride." And you're like, what's that?
Those are almost more creepy and more obvious than in the book, even.
Yeah, it's very. The only problem with it is that you're almost like, okay, Susan, you're not right in the head if you're considering this guy at all, because he really brought this whole yikes to him. But it works, and it works for Rabidash quite well. Lazareline is sort of a category unto herself. She's very much the most caricatured of the characters. I love this one line delivery where she goes, oh, I've had an idea, as though this has never happened to her ever. And she's shocked at herself. Just that delivery was worth the whole character. She was really too much. And then there was an interesting one, because you just wouldn't think that this would stand out, but Bricklethumb was cast as a girl. I assume just a lack of male actors. I don't think it was specified by the script. And that's fine. It could be two brothers and a sister living there. But she had this sort of running joke about eggs, food in general, and she was just, people are coming and going, and she's just like, a couple of lines, and it was sort of like, why did they put that in the script? But it was so funny, her delivery. Yeah, you're like, I don't care if you're a girl or a guy or if it matches the book, because this is too much fun.
Yeah, like I don't think the jokes were that funny. It was basically just that one dwarf is talking about the scenery and the other dwarf is talking about food, so they're kind of interrupting each other. But the way they did it made it funny. And then she has like this line about an egg a day keeps the Clormans away, and it's just like laugh.
Yeah, she's completely unaware of what's going on almost outside of the hut, because she is enjoying her eggs. Yeah, it was great.
Yeah.
So another thing that you reminded me, Christy, of that I liked, that was interesting to me, was I remember in the book and in the audio drama, there's a comment made about, in retrospect, when Edmund is telling the story, where he says, I made some light jest about, women's fancies or something like that, meaning to put him off. And you kind of assume that basically the gist of what Edmund would have said, some sort of thing. But in the play, they actually had Edmund give a line where he's like, well, you know what women are like, I doubt Queen Susan knows her mind. I don't remember the whole line of it now, but something about like, um, I doubt she even knows, what she's decided, and just like he like delivered it in a very way that it didn't feel like he was attacking her. It felt like he was like trying to do it in like this like man to man kind of conversation where like very much in the book he's like trying to put Rapidash off, like trying to be like, hey, we can be cool about this, and just like you see Rapidash and he just comes back and he's like, I don't like to be lied to, and you know exactly what your sister is thinking. And just that sort of quiet menace, just so good.
I think a lot of that goes into Edmund's skill as a diplomat and as like a spy master, which is really what he is. And I'm also sardonic wry Edmund is the best Edmund. And I think that just forms such a huge part of his character, at least in my mind. That is just such a huge part of his character. So I think that worked super well and like was exactly how I imagined he would do something like that, just because of who he has shown himself to be. So.
Yeah. I think Edmund also gets one of the greatest lines in the play. What I think is the greatest line that wasn't already in the book, at the very end, because after Aslan comes and turns Rapidash into a donkey, and then Aslan goes away again, and you don't quite notice exactly when Aslan disappears because you're focused on like Rapidash freaking out as a donkey, and then Shasta is kind of looking around and being like, where is he? And Edmund comes and says to him, but like, remember, my young prince. Actually, I think I have it written down here, or have it on the Logos Theater, has it on their Facebook page. Even if he is out of your sight, be assured, my young prince, you are never out of his. And I liked that because I felt like it kind of nicely sums up the whole point of the whole book.
Yeah.
And I'm curious about your thoughts about how well the play did on that I was the lion, or that theme of like Aslan always being there.
I felt it did a good job, and yeah, I mean that scene plays out very differently than in the book because of the necessity of losing that horse puppet, and therefore Shasta is somewhat static for that scene. You don't necessarily get the sense that Aslan's walking, along a cliff and keeping him from the edge.
Yeah.
But there's still a lot of the same emotion. I think it was one of his best acted scenes, Shasta's.
Yeah.
But what do the rest of you think?
Yeah, I agree. And I think that a lot of it is just because I feel like to me, the play did a super good job just getting across Shasta's despair, like in the Tomb of the Ancient Kings, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And I think with that, it just kind of showed like how low he could sink, I guess, even when he is alone. So I think, and then having that and then line at the very end, I think kind of the camera in like he was never alone. He just thought he was, and like when the cat showed up, that made all the difference. And I think every time when he had the nightmares that like the horses and Erebus left him, and then again when the cat left him, his reaction was exactly the same to both of them. He was begging them like on his knees, please, please don't go. And I thought that was just super powerful because, and we all know the cat stayed. Like Aslan was there the entire time, but even though he felt abandoned in the same way, like he wasn't.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, exactly. Huh.
Lil, anything about did you think they kept to that kind of theme of Aslan staying with Shasta and
Yeah, I pretty much, yeah, I liked how they had Aslan, like you could see him coming around behind the the tomb stationary and like growling, and then like the next minute, you see the cat puppet climbing next to Shasta. So that was another really great moment. So
Yeah, I love that scene too.
Yeah, one thing I felt, kind of to sum up here, is where they did make changes. There were, occasional lines or scenes or things that have been changed, or things that, maybe we've missed, in the sense of wishing they were there, or things that were slightly edited. But what they didn't miss was, as far as I can tell, anything about the character of Aslan. They nailed it. They kept him true to the book. And because that's always the thing that you hear about some of the bits of the movie adaptations, is that that line change, that didn't feel right, something like that. They really kept everything about Aslan, I thought, where they needed to keep it, and that, I can accept other changes if they get that right, and they did. Would you guys concur with that?
Yes.
yeah.
Okay, anything you want to say as your kind of last hurrah? Because I know that we've got some folks on the East Coast that are fading here.
Yeah.
I don't know that this is a summing up point, but I'm just remembering how much that I like that they had a scene for Lord Barr just coming before the Tisrock, and just a little scene there, and how that was really like clever and cool, like that was one of the things I especially appreciated. I said earlier, but just in that they found a way to flesh out and just make them feel like not silly, but like make them feel like actual like parts of the book, things that were only kind of related in exposition later in the book. So I just love the expanding and the creativeness of dreaming up scenes, and just, yeah, I have no complaints. I mean, if I lived closer, I would be like wanting to be there like all the time, and maybe even to see if they had an opening. I definitely just very impressed.
I think the actor who played Corin definitely told me that they're like, oh, we do auditions. I was like, I don't do theater, but thanks. But yeah, it's me. I'm the one fading. It's very late. But yeah, I don't know. I've just really enjoyed community theater, like just having that experience in basically my hometown, and now I guess it was amazing. And just have like, I know, I'm sorry y'all aren't around to see it, but if anyone watching this wants to come, or y'all too, see whatever they do in the future, I guess they'll be doing Dawn Treader next, or yeah, I guess they'll be doing Dawn Treader or Magician's Nephew. I don't know, whatever they're doing next. Greenville is a great place, and the Logos Theater is doing some really great stuff in our community. So yeah, come to Greenville. I can give you some restaurant recommendations. I actually can't. I had to ask my friends. I tried.
You did well.
It was good.
Okay, so trying to wrap things up. I think another part that I haven't touched on yet that really stood out to me was just seeing Shasta and Bree interact in those conversations, and it was just so powerful and like so exciting. And there were so many parts where they did have the lines exactly from the book, and I could like quote along with it, and that yeah. I have too much of this memory. And I was just really excited to see again that coming to life. And I literally liked the scene at the end where Bree becomes a wiser horse and Aslan is coming up behind him, because you have it playing out exactly the way it's supposed to be. Well, pretty much, there's limits. but that Bree is kind of looking off to one side and speaking very arrogantly, explaining these things, and not noticing the horrified expression on their faces. And meanwhile, Aslan is coming up behind him, and just, I don't know, like a lot of different moments, and then yeah, it was just really great to see it played out, and really like you said about everything about Aslan being faithful and being like kept, and yeah, just overall it was a really, really wonderful experience. And I'm so grateful that I got to see it, and that for everyone who was involved.
Well, thank you for joining us this evening. I'm so glad, or this, whatever time of day it is where you are. But thank you guys. I'm so glad that I got to go with you last weekend. I had so much fun. And yes, if you are in the Greenville area, if you happen to travel through there, I would look up Logos and see what they are playing at the time, because they might be playing another Narnia show. I know they have some other offerings on Tolkien and Lewis. Or you might just, see a different show that they're performing, because I doubt that anything in their repertoire is going to be subpar. Just a really extraordinary experience, and certainly the most I've ever enjoyed a Narnia play, and definitely, one of the highlights of my theatrical viewing. So thank you and good night.